My wife says, "Will you and go and get such and such item? It's in my nightstand drawer in the back left-hand corner." And I go look in the back left-hand corner of the drawer of her nightstand and I don't see it. And I come back and I say, "I couldn't find it." And she says, "I'll go look. Please don't let it be there," right? But invariably, she comes back 15 seconds later and says, "It was right where I told you." I'm still not convinced that she's not hiding them elsewhere, and then just won't own up to it. Uh, Recently, Zoe picked up a nursery rhyme from my childhood. Uh, Girls go to college to get more knowledge. Boys go to Jupiter to get, well, you probably know the rest of it, right? Uh, Men and women have had noticeable differences for as long as people have been paying attention to these things. Adults and children have had noticeable differences, no matter what similarities they have. Accordingly, we have various strengths and various weaknesses. And as we study together, growing as a family in this quarter of 2026, focusing on growth in this entire year together, I think it's appropriate for us to try and understand better what the roles within a family are and how we can execute those roles to achieve what the purpose of the family is. Now, of course, there are those differences, and I'm guessing by the number of laughs that several of you can at least sympathize with, even if not empathize with those experiences, those differences that are observed between men and women, between adults and children. And if we are to execute those roles, we need to understand that a diversity of roles exist within a family and that a person may fill more than one role at the same time. This begins, of course, in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 1, which is an appropriate place for beginnings. Then in Genesis chapter 1, when in verse 26, we see that God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth." So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. Now, it's often asserted that Genesis chapter 2 presents a variant account of the creation, but that's not the case at all. You see, Genesis 1 is a broad overview. Genesis 2 brings the more narrow focus down to the creation of human beings. But in its broad scale, it says that man and women were created in the image of God. So no matter who is better at finding the hidden remote, we are equally made and equally share in the image of God. The image of God is not something that is specific to, in greater or lesser measure, to sex or gender. But in Genesis chapter 2, we're given a more detailed account of how man and woman, male and female, were created to be. Whenever man was made, he was presented with all the creation, all the animals that were in the garden, to find that none of them would be able to satisfy that desire for companionship that he had. So in verse 21, we read that the Lord caused a deep sleep to come over the man, and he slept. God took one of his ribs and closed the flesh at that place. Then the Lord God made the rib he had taken from the man into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, "This one at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. This one will be called woman, for she was taken out of man." This is achieving the purpose that God had made in verse 18. It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper corresponding to him. That translation here in the Christian Standard Bible, if you read many translations, you'll find many different renderings of this very simple phrase. The King James Version uses help meet. Some refer to it as a co equal partner. The Christian Standard Bible, as I'm reading, a companion suitable for him. The fact that God made a suitable helper tells us that every other creature was unsuitable to this companionship. Now, of course, we have man's best friend and the like, but none was able to satisfy that desire for companionship. It's also worth noting how Moses worded this creation. Whenever we have helpmeet or helper corresponding to him, the word conveys a partner. Now, of course, helper is appropriate to this, but there are different kinds of helpers. If I'm doing some task and I take my son along to help me, I am he is helping me with me as his superior. I tell him what to do. Hold the flashlight here and aim it at this direction. That can be useful and beneficial. Sometimes we help people that are our superiors. We don't know exactly what it is that we're doing, but we're there to help however we can, to help however they tell us to help, telling us what to do. Other times we are helpers of each other because we equally share some load or some burden. If you're moving furniture around with someone, you know what it's like for one person to have the heavy end and the other person to have the light end. Those burdens may be different from each other, but the load has to be shared so that the two helpers can help each other as they carry it. It's this last sense that is conveyed whenever the book of Genesis, chapter 2, describes woman as the helper suitable to the task of being a companion to man. Man was incomplete without woman, even as woman was made for man. There is nothing suggested to us here about superiority or inferiority of inherent worth or value. It was from this creation of woman that we derive the first human relationships. It was this desire for companionship, for a human relationship, that led to the creation of woman. And it is for this reason that we read in verse 24, this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and they become one flesh. Now, note that Moses, looking back on this, says that this is the reason why a man leaves his father and mother, when at this point in time there was no father or mother to leave, because Adam and Eve were all the humans that existed. They were husband and wife before there was father and son, mother and daughter, brother and sister, strange, estranged uncle that lives in some remote part of the country, the neighbor that we casually know down the street. Before any of these other relationships existed, there was husband and wife. Accordingly, the spousal relationship is one that should be preeminent in our relationships. I love my children. I would gladly give my life and purpose to devote my life to them and their well being. But for myself, and according to the design of human beings, the primary person in each of our lives ought to be our spouse, not our child, grandchild, best friend, or any variation thereof. It's for this reason that a man should leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. It is only husband and wife that are described as being one flesh. From husband and wife, we derive father and mother. Of course, we read of Cain and Abel and Seth being born. Whenever we have father and mother, the second relationship to exist, we have child. And of course, following the natural progression, one that is less clearly defined, but real nevertheless, is an adult child. Whenever we read that this is the reason that a man should leave his father and mother, it's noteworthy that this is said in a time and place when the son would not leave physically his father and mother, but rather his new wife would come and join the family compound. We see this, for example, whenever Abraham sends his household servant Eliezer to go and to find a wife for Isaac. And he goes and gets Rebecca and brings her back, and they're married, and the whole family grows. Yet, even though they stay present in person, they leave because they leave the oversight of that father, of that mother, of that original family, and form and develop a new family on their own. But that certainly doesn't mean that they have no responsibilities for their parents, especially as they age. Whenever you examine yourself and your life, how many of these roles do you fit and fill into right now? Husband, wife, father, mother, child, adult child? Chances are you fit into more than one. But it's worth noting that if we are more than one, we may be them all at the same time, but they are still distinct roles. I may be a husband to my wife and a father to my children. Even though I am husband and father, my responsibilities as a husband are not satisfied because I meet my responsibilities as a father. And just because I meet my responsibilities as a husband does not mean that I have met my responsibilities as a father. I am obligated and duty bound to my wife, even as I am to my children. To do right by one and to do wrong by the other is to fail in some respect. So while we note that there is overlap in these roles, we need a wife and mother to be a father ourselves, that the roles, though they overlap, are still distinct in nature, and the responsibilities and expectations thereof we must fully meet, whether adult child, father, mother, husband, wife, or some variation thereof. Now, diverse roles does not equal diverse values. A husband and a wife, a father and a mother are different in their roles, but that does not grant superior value to either. A man cannot be a husband without a wife. A woman cannot be a wife without her husband. Neither can be parents without children. Neither can be parents without the other. And all of these exist within the Lord. What I mean by this is that our roles are interwoven and dependent on each other. They are diverse in the roles they fill, but of equal inherent value. Fathers have been appointed to be the head of and to lead their household. But Jesus told his disciples that whoever wants to lead must be a servant of all. Husbands and fathers are given the responsibility of leading their household, which requires them to be a servant of their wife, of their children. Husbands that are fulfilling the godly expectation of the role do nothing to their own interests, but choose instead to follow the interests of their family. Now, whether we assign value to the husband father being in a position of leadership, whether we assign value to wife, mother, children, because of the declared and stated purpose and intention of a servant father, uh, whatever instrumental value we may assign to any of those roles, the intrinsic value is the same. Let me illustrate that. Whenever you have some dish that you're making or cooking. It may be a favorite of yours, and you go and you open up the cupboard and you find out that you're missing some ingredient. You may be able to substitute it one thing for another. Maybe your recipe calls for beef broth. You don't have any, but you have chicken broth. It may not be as good, but it's a substitute. There are others that you might leave out altogether. One of my favorites is when someone says, "You should try this. You can't even taste the coconut." Well, you know what? Just leave it out, please, right? If you can't taste it, what function is it serving? Remove it from it altogether and make your dish superior. But there are others that whenever you open up your pantry and you're missing whatever ingredient is, you can't have that thing. If I wanted to make some pancakes and I needed 2 cups of milk and I only had a cup and a half, I could add some water and substitute. Maybe I really like chocolate chip pancakes, and this morning I discovered I'm out of chocolate chips. Might be a little disappointed, but I can leave that ingredient out and still have pancakes, even if they're slightly different. But if I open up the pantry and I don't have any flour at all, I could mix milk, egg, and butter together. It wouldn't be bad, but it certainly wouldn't be pancakes. So there are some things that have a different intrinsic value, that they are just worth more than others. But there are other things that have a different instrumental value, that their value is in their function, not in their inherent worth. Whenever we think of business places where there's a regional manager, an assistant manager, a shift manager, an employee, they have different instrumental values in the terms of how that company functions. They have different values. But the intrinsic value of each of those individuals as a human being, the human being that works on the floor stocking groceries, is worth just as much as the CEO that signs his paychecks. The intrinsic value of everyone that belongs to a family is exactly the same, even if we take on different roles and serve different purposes. Truly, within the family, husbands, wives, and children are some of God's good and perfect gifts that James describes in James chapter 1 and verse 17. In Proverbs 5:18 and also Proverbs 18:22, Solomon warns his son, "Let your fountain be blessed and take pleasure in the wife of your youth." In Proverbs 18:22, a man who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. And as was read for us this morning by my own son, of whom I am very proud, Psalm 127, 3 through 5, that the children of a man's youth are like quivers in his arrow. To find joy in any of these relationships outside of the Lord is to betray their purest meaning. It's for this reason in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 39 that Paul says that a widow to remarry should marry only in the Lord. 1 Corinthians 7:39. What is the purpose of our children? What is the purpose of our spouses? What is the purpose of our parents? Each person that fills a role in that family, regardless of youth or age, opportunity, or length of time that that relationship has existed, is to drive everyone else towards the Lord. I am certain that I am a better Christian, which is relatively speaking, because I have my wife as my wife, because I have my children as my children. I hope that at least in some way that they can say the same of me, that together we have a mutually positive impact on each other in this same central tenet and aim of being more pleasing to the Lord. If you look in the book of Ephesians, chapter 5 and verse 22, going down through Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, we won't read each of these verses together this morning, but you can certainly read them in time you have together with your wife this week. We find that Paul lays out here in a very broad way what many of the roles that individuals are meant to fill in a family are. And notice that each of them have this same central tenet of making us better Christians. In verse 22, he says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, because the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church." Now, many will point to this verse and identify the way that it is abused by husbands that have a disproportionate view of what their own value and self worth is. This is a great caution in the types of spouses that we choose for each other, husbands and wives. Of course, there are some things that are forever hidden from our sight. There are some things that develop years after a relationship is begun. But the model marital relationship is not between a husband that lords his authority over his wife, but as Christ is to the church. A theme we'll visit again here in just a few verses. What is the function of the husband to the wife? What is the function of Jesus to the church? He is the Savior of the body. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives are submit to their husbands in everything. In verse 25, he says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her to make her holy, cleansing her with the washing of water by the word." Husbands, do you love your wives with the same sacrificial love that Jesus showed for the church? I made reference a few moments ago to being willing to die for my children, and so I am. But I can confidently say that, never having a gun pointed at my face over the well being of my children. It's very comfortable to be able to say that in an air conditioned building full of people that the harshest thing they ever think is, does he know what time it is? But whenever we say, I am willing to die for my wife, I am willing to die for my children, what other kind of sacrifices are you willing to make? Because to love with the sacrificial love of Jesus, Jesus devoted everything about his life to his wife of this passage, to the church. Are you devoting your life to your wife and to your children? Or are they serving your interests? As we keep reading in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, we see that a father is meant to discipline his children, and that a child is meant to obey his father. Fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Now, bringing your child up in the training and the instruction of the Lord brings us back around to Psalm 127 and verse 5 that was read for us a few moments ago, that raising a child in this way will protect your honor in the presence of your enemies in the city gate. The Hebrews writer in Hebrews 12:7 speaks of providing for our children, raising our children in the form of discipline. He says that us earthly fathers practice imperfect discipline. I know that all too well. At times I'm too hard, at times I'm not hard enough, at times I'm just plain out wrong at what I thought did or did not happen, but I certainly do my best. He also says in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8 that the one that doesn't provide for the material well-being of his family is worse than an unbeliever. Even whenever my father had left the church entirely for more than a decade, 1 Timothy 5:8 was a verse that I heard him repeat time and again because he was still acutely aware of this responsibility that he had to provide for his family. A mother is meant to nurture her children. We see that in Titus 2, 4, and 5, that that's what a mother is meant to do with her young children to prepare them for the next generation. In Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 11, whenever God wanted to convey this nurturing aspect of his own to his children, Israel, he depicted himself as a mother eagle watching over her nest. So a father is meant to discipline, to provide for his children. A mother is meant to nurture her children. In both of these, we see an overlapping responsibility of providing safety and security. Now, that safety and security is not always the same thing, does not always manifest itself in the same way. I've told y'all before about a time that my dad and I were out walking in the woods as we would do because what else are you going to do in Red Bowling Springs? And there was a young bull that took exception to us being there, and he directed me over to a patch of thin cedar trees. He told me what to do in the event of his death, which is troubling for a 10-year-old. And he picks a large stick up off the ground and he swings it at the bull and he shouts at him and challenges him until the bull scampers off like a little puppy. Now, my dad, he's shorter than I am, he's skinnier than I am, but in that moment, he was 6'2" and 200 pounds, right? He was a hero in my eyes. A few years later, when I was 15, one of my best friends from school died in an accident at her 15th birthday party with her dad. And I was actually at Six Flags in Louisville, Kentucky at the day. I was going to be preaching at the Butler's Landing Church of Christ the next day, and the full time preacher there had taken me and another group to the amusement park. Got back home. I say back home, back to his house where I was going to be staying that night, and his wife told me I needed to call my dad. He called my dad and he told me, and Kenny took me back home, and I remember crying and being sad, of course, but I didn't cry nearly as much until I was coming down the hallway and my mom stepped out of a door halfway up the hall. And all I did was break down, cry, and hug her. Which one made me feel more safe? They both made me feel safe. My dad made me feel safe when I felt like my life and well-being were in mortal peril. My mother made me feel safe whenever I was sad and heartbroken and didn't know how to express it yet. Our parents serve different roles, but they are united in the same function. I don't have my mother anymore, but I still have the influence. I still have everything that she invested in me to help mold me and shape me into who I am. She wasn't perfect at it. She certainly would want to correct mistakes that she'd made along the way, even as we all do. But she was certainly successful in this aim to nurture her children. We are given this task, this responsibility to be able to effectively teach and communicate these godly values and principles to our children. The troubling thing, though, is that, of course, they get to make up their own mind. So for this reason, that in Colossians 3:20, in Ephesians 6:4 that we've read already, that Paul says that a child is meant to obey their parents. Of course, that's something that comes with an expiration date. The time comes whenever that child must leave father and mother and then begin to make decisions on their own. No matter how effectively we parent, that can always go awry because those children have wills and minds of their own. But even as they become adult children, they still have their own responsibility as well. I read 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8 that if a man doesn't provide for his own family, he's worse than an unbeliever. But the context of First Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8 is not a father and his children. It's a man and his widow mother. Whenever he says that if a man doesn't provide for his own household, the own household is his aging parents that need him. Truly, whether as children, or adult children, as father, mother, husband, wife, we have these God given responsibilities, aims, and purposes for what the family is meant to do. And why do all of these roles exist? To model for us what the Lord's concern for his people is. The reason that Paul says in Ephesians 5 for wives to submit to their husbands as to the Lord, for husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church, for the Hebrews writer in Hebrews 12 to be able to point to the discipline that fathers give to their children. The reason that God is able to say that we are adopted as his sons, that we were chosen and made to be his children and his offspring, is because we know what it means to be a husband. We know what it means to be a wife. We know what it means to be a father or a mother or a child, to be a young child with parents, to be an adult child with aging parents, and any and everything in between. And every one of those relationships paints a bigger and fuller picture of what the relation is of the Lord to his people. And more than anything, the Lord wants you to himself as his wife that he paid a dear price to win to himself, as a child that he paid a great cost to adopt as his sons. If you're here this morning and you neither belong to the bride of Christ or the sons of God, repair that condition this morning. Put Christ Jesus on in baptism. Be immersed in water for the remission of your sins to share in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. If you have put Christ on in baptism in the past, however, and realize now that you have not been a faithful partner to him, you've not been an obedient child to him, you've been entangled and overcome by the defilements of the world. The shepherds of this church are here to pray with you and to pray for you. And if you have any need of the Lord's church, we want to be able to prove to you the love of the Lord, to share with you the good and perfect gifts that he's given us to your service and to his glory. If you have any such need, we humbly ask you to make yourself known in whatever way is comfortable for you as we stand and as we sing.